Good evening. When thinking about what I would say tonight, I was originally thinking of a theme based on bitterness. And then after having that shabu-shabu soup, the bitter melon that's part of that, I decided to keep it that way, but my bitterness is much less. And as I can attest, and as others who have had that soup, you will be less bitter after having it. But I still think there's an element of bitterness to my speech, as you'll see. When I think of democracy in America, the first thing that comes to mind is not really. This war on terror, as Jane Mayer puts it, it's really a war on our ideals. Now, it's easy for me to be bitter these days, not just because of my personal shafting by my government, but it's also because of this mucked up direction that this country has taken in the past 7 years and seems intent on continuing to take. Now, for those of you who have no idea who I am or why I became bitter, allow me to give you a quick synopsis. I'm an active duty naval officer, still to this day. Not allowed to wear the uniform when I speak to a crowd such as this. I'm a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy. I'm still subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which is the military's penal laws. So I have to be careful what I say, lest I be hauled back into military court and prosecuted for speaking truth to power. And I wouldn't be the first service member whose speech was chilled by this very real threat. And some of you may have heard of Lieutenant Aaron Watada out of Washington State, who was prosecuted for speaking truth to power. Or Major Dan Maury of the U.S. Marine Corps. He was a JAG Corps lawyer. He represented the Australian terrorist David Hicks. And he spoke out about that kangaroo court down there called the Commissions down at Guantanamo. And he was threatened with prosecution by the same prosecutor that now comes out and says the whole system was rigged in order to ensure convictions. So if I seem like I'm holding back tonight, you should understand why, because of that threat that confronts me. Another concern I have, which also keeps me from speaking my mind, is that I have a case pending in the Navy's appellate court system. As NATO said, I was convicted at a military court-martial, and this was last May of 2007, and my case is now going through the appellate process. And I don't want to jeopardize my chances for a favorable outcome. Now, given that I was afforded little due process, not much more than those detainees down at Guantanamo Bay are not receiving, I really don't have a reason to be optimistic, but I got to try. Okay, that's enough of the introductory or prefacing remarks about my background or why I may be holding back. But I'd like to tell you a little bit more about who I am and why I'm here tonight. As I alluded to, I was court-martialed and convicted in May 2007 for an act I committed 2 years prior to that, January of 2005. Here's what happened. After the United States Supreme Court, the highest court of this land, had ruled that the prisoners down at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, had the right to file habeas corpus petitions in federal court, I was assigned down to Guantanamo a week after that opinion was issued. And not long into my tour there, I realized that I was operating in a system that had badly derailed from our fundamental norms of justice. About 3 months into my tour there was a U.S. District Court opinion out of the D.C. Circuit who said, based on that Supreme Court decision, these prisoners had the right to have attorneys in order to file these habeas corpus petitions. How else were they to perfect these habeas corpus claims that they were entitled to? It's like, how could we as American citizens go into a foreign country, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, and navigate their court system without a lawyer that knows that system? And that's all this district court opinion was saying. They said the Supreme Court said these detainees have the right to file habeas corpus petitions. They can't do this without attorneys, so they have the right to have these attorneys to represent them if they so choose to have them. The only problem is The lawyers who attempted to represent these detainees had no idea who all was down there. We, including me, I was part of that legal team down there on the legal staff at Guantanamo, were putting obstacles in their way. We were stonewalling, not releasing information in order for them, these attorneys, to ascertain who in fact was down there and whether they wanted to be represented to file these habeas corpus petitions. I knew, based on my training as a JAG Corps officer and as a civilian lawyer trained on habeas corpus, that we have no disappeareds in this country. But that's what we were doing down at Guantanamo. That's what we were enforcing down at Guantanamo. And then, like future President Obama said in Denver not too long ago, I said, enough. No more stonewalling. I took it upon myself to do what the government refused to do. I released the names of the prisoners at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. I sent the names to an attorney here in New York City, an attorney who worked for the Center for Constitutional Rights, an attorney who was involved in a litigation that gave us that Supreme Court decision a week before I went down to Guantanamo. That Supreme Court decision that said they had the right to file habeas corpus petitions. This attorney was seeking the names of the rest of the detainees. The only reason she was able to bring a case in the first place is because family members of the original detainees knew that they were at Guantanamo. So they were able to bring this habeas corpus petition or this lawsuit in federal court. But they needed to ascertain who were all the other prisoners. But we wouldn't let them get that information. So I sent this letter, or this list, to her. Now that list of names that I released had no classification markings on it whatsoever. And if anybody experienced in reviewing classified documents, they have big stamps, whether on the computer screen or on the document itself, that says confidential, secret, or top secret. No markings whatsoever. Nor had these names ever been deemed national defense information. That was never the basis for the government withholding these names. But the government contended that the list was classified and was national defense information. The jury believed them. And the government prevented me from presenting any evidence of abuse down at the prison, even though my job down there as the second lawyer, or the number 2 lawyer, there was one above me, but my job was to gather and assemble all the allegations of abuse and to investigate all allegations of abuse. I knew a little bit about what was really going on down there, but we could not present that evidence. The judge did not allow us to present it to the court. I could not present my true intent, was to assist these attorneys at the Center for Constitutional Rights to implement that Rasul decision that said they had the right to bring habeas corpus petitions, and a district court opinion that said that they had the right to have attorneys in order to bring these petitions. That evidence was not allowed. Nor were the efforts of the multitude of attorneys, more than 500, who had tried to get information but were stonewalled in the process. The decision itself, Rasul, was not allowed to be presented. So, the jury was presented with evidence that this was a classified list, that it was national defense information, and they convicted me. I was sentenced to 6 months confinement in a Navy brig, and I was kicked out of the Navy with the worst characterization of service that the military can give. I also lost my retirement, which after 21 years of service, I would have been entitled to 50% of the pay I had received during my active duty status for the rest of my life for doing nothing but just retiring and carrying on with my life. So I lost that. My JAG certification, or my lawyer certification, a military lawyer certification, that was taken away from me, so I could never practice in a military court, which you don't have to be a military attorney to practice there. Many civilian attorneys who are retired military attorneys practice there. I could never do that as well. Now my civilian law license is in limbo pending my appeal in the Navy court system. So for this one humane act that caused no harm at all to our government's national security, not one person in it was harmed by the actions I took. nor came even close to being harmed by the decision I took. I was prosecuted for that humane act. Contrast that with that conspiracy at the highest levels of our government, that conspiracy that sought, in fact, they didn't just seek, but they accomplished the goal of identifying an undercover CIA operative. That case was not prosecuted for what the real crime was, which was releasing that identity of Valerie Plame, because they said intent would be too hard to prove. They were able to do it in my case. Now, my 20-plus years of military career, of military service, 12 in the Navy, 8.5 as an enlisted soldier in the Army, it's over. The only life I knew, having dropped out of high school at the age of 17 and joining the Army, serving my entire life, except for 3 years of law school, that's over. For trying to navigate away from the numerous war crimes and do what was required by law. Not just international law, but the law of this land. The law that my government drilled into me over the years as a Navy JAG. Basic constitutional principles. For doing that, my career is over. But there appeared to be some light at the end of this dark tunnel, not long after I got out of the brig last October. October 13th will be 1 year that I've been out of the brig. I began substitute teaching in Florida, primarily with autistic elementary school children. And I found that teaching was going to be my next career move, since I could no longer practice law at the moment. But having been released with a close to six-figure income to nothing, I knew I had to go to a place where I could survive without car payments. And the best place for public transpo and the best place that had from my research, had a good school training program was right here in New York City. So I applied to the New York City Teaching Fellows program. I was accepted as a special education elementary fellow. I moved up here this past June. I went through 7 weeks of intensive training that consisted of taking 2 master's level courses at Hunter College, just up the road here. I also had to take some evening seminars during that 7-week training. And then I guess the most crucial part of it, I spent 5 weeks over the summer in a 4th grade elementary class in Harlem. So I earned an A and an A+ in those 2 master's courses. I taught lessons to my students, both as a group class and individually tutoring students. I received positive feedback from every observer, my professors, my cooperating teacher in the classroom, my seminar observer gave me positive feedback. I successfully completed the training. I returned to Florida to await the beginning of this school year. But 1 week before returning to New York City to start the school year, the fellows informed me that I was being dropped from the program because I did not clear the background investigation because of Guantanamo. So not only was I shafted by the federal government, I had now been shafted by the city and state government. So I hope these experiences convey my reason for bitterness that I opened up with. I tried to right the wrongs at Guantanamo. No self-interest involved. I didn't send this to a reporter or to somebody for some personal gain. I sent it to the attorneys who were trying to bring the cases before a district court. Based on the law, as I was trained, and standing up for human rights. I found that detainees or prisoners who were represented by counsel, their allegations of abuse declined because now it was a little bit more of an open process. Those that were unrepresented had no one to cry to. So I was smacked down by the government for doing this. I then tried to teach in an area where teachers are badly needed, special education. I was smacked down again. So as recently as the beginning of this month, I was thinking, what am I to do? Do I convert to neocon and become one of Chimpy and his sidekick Prick's crime family? Actually, it's probably the Prick who's running the show, and Chimpy is the sidekick. Do I become one of their arms? Join their neocon revolution? That just wasn't in me. That's not how I was raised. That's not my moral compass. I'm not going to play along to get along to do that. Fortunately, there are some good souls out there amongst you, and they aren't in the government. The Bronx Defenders, literally, they saved my ass. The Bronx Defenders, they provide public defense services for accused in the Bronx. And they also provide family defense services for parents who have their children taken away amidst allegations of abuse or neglect. I was this close to homelessness for the second time in my life, but they gave me the opportunity to utilize all the education I've obtained over the years for good again. I'm now going to be helping others who are being shat on by their government. And when I mentioned the Bronx Defenders, I'd be remiss if I did not mention a few of the individuals who gave me this fighting chance. David Feiga. Some of you may know of him. He wrote the book called Indefensible. And now there's a TV show based on that book and his experiences at the Bronx Defenders called Raising the Bar on TNT. Comes on in about 40 minutes. I highly recommend you tune into that Monday nights, 10 p.m. Robin Steinberg, she is the executive director of the Bronx Defenders, and she made a decision to take a chance on me, and I'm forever grateful for that. Now, there's always going to be bitterness over the events of the past 7 years, and I'm sure there's more to come. But at least I'm back in the fight again, doing the right thing. And I want so much to replace my bitterness with a word that was in the national dialogue not so long ago, before lipstick and lapel pins. And that word is hope. Now, it may seem cliche, but I got to try to be optimistic and have some hope. As a believer in the Constitution, I hope that I can have this hope. And when I think of hope and trying to have some optimism again, I think back just not so long ago, back in St. Paul, when Sarah Palin was speaking at that convention, she made the following quote. She said, "Al-Qaeda terrorists still plot to inflict catastrophic harm on America. And he, Obama, is worried that someone won't read them their rights." Now, Obama, as many of you know, taught constitutional law at the University of Chicago for more than 10 years. He knows that these prisoners are entitled to file writs of habeas corpus. He called it the foundation of Anglo-American law. And he stated the principle very simply in response to Palin's remarks. He said, if the government grabs you, then you have the right to at least ask, why was I grabbed? Maybe you got the wrong person. Because we don't always get the right person. And Obama's not the first person to say that. General J. Hood, he was my commander down at Guantanamo when I was stationed down there. He actually said that to the press. He said sometimes we didn't get the right person. And the evidence bore that out. When I was down there, originally assigned down there in 2004, we had 660 plus prisoners in July of 2004. These worst of the worst, as they were called. Today, what do we have? 170 or so prisoners. So General J. Hood was correct. Sometimes we did get the right person. Or the alternative is we've released a lot of the worst of the worst. I don't think that's the case. I know that's not the case. Obama continued on. We may think it's Mohammed the terrorist, but it might be Mohammed the cab driver. You might think it's Barack the bomb thrower, but it might be Barack the guy running for president. I think this quote, I guess, is what sealed the deal for me in giving me some optimism and some hope again, hopefully. He said, quote, "The reason that you have this principle is not to be soft on terrorism. It's because that's who we are. That's what we're protecting. Don't mock the Constitution, Sarah Palin. Don't make fun of it. Don't suggest that it's not American to abide by what the founders had set up. It's worked pretty well for over 200 years. This candidate gets it." And it's this comment that I just read to you that gives me the optimism that I will no longer be bitter and that I can continue to have hope that things will change and that we can have true democracy in America and that this war on terror will come to an end. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your evening.